outside my front window. The storm slammed at the glass while a huge black dog stood chest deep in snow, her pup shivering under her, paws pressed flat to the frost as my house quietly turned against me. I had already sent them away once, but still she chose to freeze there, guarding a man too dazed to stand and remember what had ignored, to understand why she would rather face that cold than my warm doorway. We have to go back to the soft, ordinary mornings before anything felt wrong. By the time the sun finally climbed over Maple Ridge, the snow in my front yard had turned to a crust of glass. I stood at the kitchen sink, mug in hand, staring at the faint prints leading away from my porch. 2 sets, running side by side, one big and heavy, the other no bigger than my palm. I told myself they were just strays, that I had imagined the eyes at the window watching me breathe. The thought lingered anyway, thin and sharp as the air outside. The town radio murmured in the background, the morning show hosts talking about another cruel cold snap, power lines straining, pipes bursting in old farmhouses like mine. I turned up the thermostat and listened to the furnace groan to life in the basement. The house ticked and settled around me, the way old houses do when they are trying to pretend they are still young and reliable. I stood in the doorway a long time, listening for something that was not there. I walked to the front door and cracked it open. Bitter air rushed in, stealing my breath and needling my cheeks. On the mat lay a single black hair, thick and coarse, caught in the weave like a stray thread. Beside it, a smear in the frost where a paw had rested for a long time. I rubbed it away with my slipper as if erasing a word I did not want to read aloud, then checked the street, pretending there was nothing left to see. Across the street, Mrs. Klein stepped out onto her porch to toss seed for the birds clustered like ash on the snow. She lifted her hand in that cautious way neighbours do when they know you mostly by your mailbox and your truck. I waved back, and she called, asking if I had heard the dogs in the night. I said no too quickly, my voice fogging the air between us like a small lie, and she frowned before retreating into her warm doorway. On my way to the garage, I passed the side window, the one that looks out directly onto the porch. A faint oval of cleared glass sat at eye height, the frost melted by warmth that had not been mine. Thin trails of condensation had run down and frozen again. I touched the cold pane and imagined a large head pressing there, breath fogging, watching me while I slept 2 rooms away. For a moment my own reflection looked like a stranger's. At the small engine shop, my hands found their rhythm without my mind. Mowers, snowblowers, chainsaws in for sharpening after fallen branches cluttered the roads. Stan, my part-time kid, asked if I had seen the black bear of a dog people were posting about on Facebook. He shoved his phone at me, a grainy photo of a dark shape near my fence line. eyes two tiny coins of light. I laughed, but it sounded a little thin in my own ears. I brushed it off. Said cameras always made things look bigger and meaner than they were. He laughed. Said his mum was warning him not to walk home after dark in case the beast liked skinny teenagers. I joked that if the dog was smart, it would leave town like everyone else. Still, when the bell over the shop door rang at closing, my first wild thought was that the dog had come for me, and my shoulders tensed before I could help it. It was only a delivery guy with a box of parts and a frozen beard, stomping snow from his boots. Yet, as I locked up and stepped into the purple light of late afternoon, I caught sight of tracks crossing the alley behind the shop. Large, deliberate prints beside smaller ones, weaving between dumpsters and the chain-link fence, as if they were searching for something familiar and kept missing it. I pretended not to notice and went home anyway. That night, I fell asleep in my chair in front of the television, the way men my age tend to when the news runs together. Sometime after midnight, a dull thump pulled me halfway awake. The house was quiet, the furnace humming below. Then came another, softer sound, like a hand resting against the side of the world. I told myself it could wait, but my pulse had already stepped up its pace. I muted the television. For a moment, there was only the ticking of the wall clock and the whisper of air through the vents. Then I heard it again, a gentle scrape at the front door, followed by a muffled whine, not high and frantic, but low and pressed down, the way someone might talk if they were trying not to scare a child. The sound threaded through the walls until it felt like it was inside my chest. I told myself it was wind pressing a loose branch against the siding. Still, I got up, slipped on my boots without socks, and walked down the hallway. The cold grew sharper with each step. At the door, a thin line of frost had pushed in around the edges, sparkling like ground glass in the porch light seeping through. The handle felt almost hot in my hand by comparison, slick with the sweat of my hesitation. When I opened it, the first thing I saw were the eyes. They were level with my chest, a dark, steady brown that caught the light and held it. A huge black dog stood on the mat, her coat dusted with crystals of snow. Beside her, pressed almost under her front leg, a smaller shape shivered, fur sticking out in uneven clumps. The night behind them billowed white, making their bodies look cut from paper. The puppy looked up at me with the same eyes, only wider, confused, and rimmed with ice. The mother shifted her weight, placing one broad paw gently against the threshold but not crossing it. Her body blocked the wind as best it could. I felt the heat from my house roll out around my ankles and watched her not move. The choice hung there between us, simple and impossibly heavy at the same time. A porch light snapped on across the street. Mrs. Klein's voice floated over, worried and thin, asking if I was all right. I said I was fine, that a couple of strays had wandered up. She mentioned animal control making rounds. Folks nervous about that big black dog. Her words hung in the cold air between us like a quiet warning. Behind me, the house exhaled another warm breath I did not invite them into. I looked back down. The mother dog's gaze flicked from my face to the warm darkness behind me and then to her pup. She gave the smallest push forward with her shoulder, as if offering the little one up to something better. I felt my throat tighten. I could take them both in, I thought, just for the night, just until morning. The thought glowed for a moment like a porch light and then dimmed. Instead, I stepped back, heart hammering, and told them no, more to myself than to them. I closed the door slowly, feeling the faint resistance of that paw through the wood, as if she had leaned her weight there at the last second. On the radio later, I heard the same story everyone else did. A dangerous Cane Corso roaming town. I was the only door she had chosen twice, and I did not know why that was. Before the town started swapping stories about the black Cane Corso, I had seen her twice that fall at the edge of my property. Back then, the leaves were still on the maples, red and gold, and the mornings smelled like wet earth instead of iron. I would catch a flicker of movement by the old fence line and feel watched without feeling afraid. It was like noticing a new star on a familiar sky. One at the gas station on Route 12. He'd seen a truck with an out-of-state plate and a crude plywood kennel in the back. A dark dog paced inside it, muscles tight, looking everywhere but at the man pumping fuel. He was on the phone, shouting about needing protection at some cabin outside town. I remember thinking the dog looked more trapped than dangerous, a tool someone else had convinced themselves they needed. A month later, that same cabin burned halfway to the ground in an electrical fire. The paper said no one was home. Only a notation at the bottom mentioned 2 dogs unaccounted for. Folks in town shook their heads, said it was a shame but not their business. I clipped the article and stuck it under a magnet because something about it bothered me. The picture of that plywood kennel hovered in my mind. My own life had shrunk to a small loop by then. Shop, house, grocery store, back to house. My wife had been gone 5 years. The kids were scattered across states warmer than ours. A heart scare the previous winter had scared them into cooling more often, but hadn't changed the simple fact. At night, it was just me and the hum of the refrigerator. The quiet got into the joints of the house and mine. On the first real snow of the season, I came home late from the shop and nearly slipped on the porch. When I looked down, I saw prints pressed into the fresh powder, circling once and stopping by the door. Melted spots showed where something had stood still for a long time. Listening. I told myself it had probably been a neighbour's lab getting curious, but the prints looked too wide, too deliberate. Still, I started noticing little signs I could not explain away. A shallow hollow under the cedar hedge where something large had lain. The snow melted to a dark oval. Birdseed scattered farther than misses. Klein would ever throw it, as if brushed aside by a sweeping tail. The faint smell of dog, clean and cold, drifted into my garage on days I worked with the door open. They were ghosts leaving proof of a body. One Saturday, Stan showed up late, cheeks pink, breath clouding. He said he'd seen the big black dog trotting alongside a smaller one out near the frozen creek, both heads high, watching the road but never stepping onto it. He laughed it off as guard dog training. But he also mentioned hearing from his uncle that animal control had started a file on them. Files mean someone is counting the days. The longer I pretended not to care, the sharper the world around me felt. In the grocery store, I heard two women whispering that someone needed to do something before a kid got hurt. At church, the pastor mentioned looking out for creatures in need in the same breath as checking on older neighbours. I stared at my hands and thought of those prints at my door, the ones I had stepped over. That winter, the doctor told me to work less and rest more. But small-town businesses do not really retire. I kept the shop open, because what else was I going to do with my days? When you live alone long enough, you begin to believe that your circle is set. Stray dogs, burned cabins, rumours on the radio, those are someone else's stories, not yours. That belief felt safe, even if it was not true. Except every time I walked from the truck to my porch, I hesitated at the top step, listening. The house loomed warm and square behind me, but the yard felt like a question waiting to be asked. I was not a man who brought new things into his life anymore. That, more than the cold, was what kept my hand on the doorknob instead of reaching out into the dark. Habit can be as strong as any locked gate. The night after they stood on my porch, the weatherman's voice sharpened. A polar front was dropping down, wind chills dipping into the kind of numbers that make even hardy towns like ours nervous. The emergency crawl at the bottom of the screen asked folks to bring pets inside. Check on barns. Watch for anyone sleeping rough along the river. The list of vulnerable beings grew longer as the hours did. I turned the volume down and looked around my house. 2 bedrooms sat empty now, except for old quilts and boxes of school projects my kids hadn't wanted to throw away. The couch sagged where I always sat. In the entryway, a faint smudge marked the lower half of the door, where something wet had pressed and then frozen and then melted again. It was such a small mark to cause such noisy thoughts. The next morning, I found a voicemail from County Animal Control. The officer, a woman with a calm, tired voice, asked if I'd seen a large black Cane Corso travelling with a pup. They're skittish, but not aggressive, she said. We're trying to bring them in before the worst of the cold. They keep circling the same block and then disappearing again. Her words drew a slow circle around my house. I listened to the message twice, thumb resting on the replay button. Circling the same block could only mean our little stretch of Maple Ridge. I glanced at the window. Outside, snow drifted in slow spirals, carried by a lazy wind that would turn sharp by night. I poured kibble from an old bag into a metal pan and told myself it was for any dog that passed by. Not for two in particular. I set the pan at the edge of the porch, close enough to the house that the overhang would keep the worst off, but far enough that I would not see their faces if they came while I was looking. Habit made me tap the side, the way I used to when calling our old beagle in from the yard. The sound rang out once and then swallowed into the white. I waited, then pretended I hadn't. Later, at the shop, a customer came in stamping his boots, complaining that some monster dog had left prints all over his driveway in the night. He pulled out his phone to show me photos of deep tracks leading up to his garage and then turning away, as if the animal had thought better of it. I recognized the pattern. Big, then small, then big again. A family deciding where not to go. You see anything like that near your place, Tom? He asked. I shrugged and said I mostly kept my curtains closed. He snorted, said the dog should be shot or shipped off. The words landed heavier than he meant. I watched him drive away in his warm truck and thought of the voicemail, of a woman trying to catch a dog before the cold did. Curiosity had turned into responsibility when I wasn't looking. That evening, I left the porch light on and the hallway light behind the front door as well, creating a warm tunnel of gold that spilled out onto the snow. I sat in my chair but didn't turn on the television. Instead, I listened to the house breathe and the wind scratch along the eaves. Every creak sent my mind to the door, to the pan of kibble waiting there, growing colder by the minute. When the scrape finally came, it was softer than the first time, almost polite. I moved quietly down the hall and stopped behind the narrow curtain at the side window. Through a patch of clear glass, I saw her. The big black dog stood with her shoulder against the storm. Her body curved around the pup. Snow clung to their backs like ash. They appeared exactly where any camera crew would want them. She lifted one massive paw and placed it gently on the glass. Not banging, just resting there, as if feeling for a pulse on the other side. The pup mimicked her. Two small toes splayed, breath puffing tiny clouds. I stayed hidden in the shadows, one hand on the light switch, knowing I could open the door now change everything, and not yet knowing if I would. The lights inside flickered on their faces like a promise. The cold front hit like a wall. By late afternoon, the wind had teeth, rattling the porch railing and driving loose snow sideways. The radio urged folks to stay inside, limit driving, conserve power. I went through my little checklist. Faucets dripping, flashlight by the bed, extra blankets folded on the couch. The house vibrated with the low, constant rush of the storm. Outside, Maple Ridge dissolved into a white tunnel. In the basement, the old furnace coughed when it started, a heavy metallic shudder that travelled up through the ductwork. It had done that for years, but tonight the sound felt different, wetter somehow. I stood at the top of the basement stairs a long time, listening to the burner cycle on and off. Warmth crept up the walls, chased by a faint, oily smell I told myself I imagined, even as it clung to the back of my throat. At closing time, Stan's mum called the shop, her voice tight. She said he had seen the big black dog and the pup again near my road, both of them standing in the open as the wind whipped around them. If you see them, Tom, call animal control, she said. They don't know enough to come in out of the cold. Her worry seeped into me like the draft under the back door. Stubborn and insistent. Driving home, the world narrowed to 2 tire tracks and the glow of my headlights. The snow made everything smaller, even the familiar bend past the Klein house. As I pulled into my driveway, my beams picked up 2 shapes in the swirling white. The big dog stood between my porch and the road, body angled to shield, the smaller one huddled close to her chest. They looked like statues carved from night. When I stepped out, the cold slammed into me, but they did not move. The mother watched me with that same steady gaze, snow crusting her whiskers. The pup shivered, paws lifting and setting down in the drift. I opened the truck door wider, motioned, said, "Come on, girl," the way I used to talk to our beagle. The pup took one hopeful step. The mother blocked her with her shoulder, firm but gentle. Something in the way she did it stopped me. She wasn't keeping the pup from shelter out of stubbornness. She was holding a line only she understood. Her eyes flicked to the house, to the faint orange glow at the windows, then back to me. A gust of wind blew her scent past me, cold fur, snow, and underneath, the sharp tang of old smoke that had never quite left. Some memories, it seemed, could freeze in place. I remembered the burned cabin in the article, the note about unaccounted dogs. A picture he'd never seen clicked into place. A dog that had learned to fear thresholds and doorways, that had stood once already watching a house fill with smoke from the wrong side of the glass. I looked back at my windows, the flicker of the television painting restless colours on the curtains, as if the house were breathing too fast. I shook off the chill crawling up my spine, forced a smile I didn't quite feel. "Suit yourselves," I said. "It'll leave the light on." I filled a shallow plastic bin with blankets and set it against the leeward side of the porch, out of the wind. I scattered extra kibble near it, then stepped back inside, telling myself I had done enough for strangers in the snow. The door latch clicked louder than usual. As the evening deepened, the storm grew louder. Snow hissed against the windows, and the furnace kicked harder, the burner running longer each time. A dull ache crept up behind my eyes. I chalked it up to the weather and the bright glare of the television. I turned the volume low, meaning to watch the late scores, and instead drifted sideways into sleep, my head nodding toward the soft, dangerous warmth. The sound that woke me was not the storm or the house, but a repeated, insistent thump. At first it threaded through whatever I was dreaming, part of some forgotten door being forced in. Then another came, followed by a scrape like heavy fabric dragged over glass. I opened my eyes to the strange orange light of emergency alerts crawling across the muted screen. Words I could not yet read. I pushed myself up, heart pounding in that embarrassing way my doctor worried about. The air felt thicker, heavier, as if the room had been holding its breath for hours. Another thump came from the front of the house, this one followed by a low, drawn-out whine that seemed too big to fit through the walls. The clock on the mantel said 2. 17 a.m. The storm outside roared like distant traffic, steady and uncaring. I tasted metal on my tongue and could not tell if it was fear. I staggered down the hallway, one hand on the wall. Halfway there, a wave of dizziness rolled through me, bending the floor. I grabbed the console table, waited for the world to tilt back. From the sidelight window, an eerie glow seeped in the porch light shining on swirling snow. Against it, a massive head and a smaller one pressed close, paws striking the glass again. Their silhouettes looked less like strays now and more like sentries, refusing to leave their post. I pressed my forehead to the cold glass of the sidelight without meaning to. On the other side, inches away, the Cane Corso's eyes met mine through a film of frost. Her fur was crusted white, lashes spiked with ice. She lifted her paw again and set it squarely against the window pane. Pads flattened, claws curled so she would not scratch, only insist. Her breath made small circles of clarity on the glass. Behind her, the pup tried to mimic the gesture but could not reach as high, leaving smaller cloudy prints lower on the glass. Snow had drifted up around their legs, almost to the pup's chest. Wind tore at their ears and tails, yet they held their ground. The warm glow from the hallway spilled around my shoulders, stopping at the barrier between us. I realized they had accepted the cold, but not my earlier answer. A sudden wave of nausea rolled through me, stronger than before. The air in the hall felt wrong, stale and metallic, carrying a faint hint of exhaust. Somewhere behind the walls, the furnace kicked on again with a heavy clank. The dog's eyes flicked toward the sound, then snapped back to my face. She whined, deep in her chest, and pressed her paw harder into the glass, drawing a thin crack in the frost. My training as anything other than a mechanic consisted mostly of life with a practical wife. Her voice rose up now from memory. If something smells off, Tom, open a window first and argue with yourself later. My hand fumbled for the deadbolt. When I cracked the door, a thicker band of warm, heavy air rolled past me, followed by a sting in my nose and throat. The house behind me seemed to sigh in protest. The big dog stepped back from the threshold, pulling the pup with her. Even with the door open and heat spilling onto the porch, she refused to cross. She paced once, head low, then swung it toward the driveway and back to me, as if urging me to come her direction instead of inviting herself into mine. The pup yelped softly, teeth chattering. Their choice was clear. Out here cold and alive, or in there warm and wrong. I stepped out in my socks, the boards burning with cold through the thin cotton. The night slapped my face awake. Behind me, through the crack of the door, I saw the living room wrapped in an odd, wavering haze. The television glowed, colours blurred. I realised I had not truly smelled fresh air in hours. My head buzzed in a way that had nothing to do with age, like bees trapped inside a jar. Another dizzy spell hit, harder than the last. My knees buckled, and I grabbed the porch post. In an instant, the Cane Corso moved, bracing her shoulder against my hip as if she had done this 1,000 times. My weight fell partly onto her. She did not flinch, only leaned into the pressure, guiding me step by careful step down the slick stairs toward the yard. The snow came up around my ankles, biting and clean. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, faint at first, then growing clearer. I dimly remembered the carbon monoxide warning sticker by the furnace, the emergency number printed on the bottom of the weather alert. Maybe I had called, maybe a neighbour had. My vision tunneled. The last thing I saw before my legs fully went was the mother dog positioning herself between me and the open door. I clung to the sound because it meant someone else was awake in this frozen town. When I came back to myself, my lungs were full of air so cold it hurt in a clean way. I lay on a stretcher near the end of my own driveway, a blanket around my shoulders, an oxygen mask over my face. Red and blue lights pulsed against the snowbanks. 3 police cruisers, a fire truck, and an ambulance lined the quiet street, engines rumbling in the dark. My house glowed behind them like a patient under examination. Firefighters moved in and out of my house with meters and hoses, voices low but serious. One of them, a woman with frost in her eyebrows, glanced at me and then toward the front yard. Co-levels are high inside, she told the paramedic. Furnace was backdrafting into the ductwork. Another hour, maybe less, and he would have gone to sleep for good. Her words settled heavier than the blanket. The idea that an old furnace could decide the hour of my leaving felt unfair. Near the porch, steps, under the wide beam of a cruiser's spotlight. The Cane Corso sat with the pup tucked under her chest. Steam rose from their coats as the warmth of the engines reached them. Snow clung to the fur along their legs in hard clumps. An animal control officer knelt at a cautious distance, holding out a gloved hand. The big dog's eyes never left me, tracking each shallow breath I took. The officer looked from them to me. They stayed out here the whole time, she said quietly. Your neighbour called because she saw them at your window, pawing and howling like they were trying to drag you out with their eyes. They could have run. Instead, they chose to freeze outside your door. My throat closed. That wasn't the part that broke me. What broke me was realizing I had told them no twice, and they had guarded me anyway. The next day, after a night in the hospital under blinking monitors, they wheeled me past the nurse's station with a packet of instructions in my lap. Replace the furnace. Install detectors. Accept help when it is offered. Outside, my street looked softer under the daylight, as if the storm had exhaled and left everything a little humbled. My breath fogged in the air, proof I was still allowed to see it. A patrol car idled in front of my house, exhaust pluming. The animal control officer from the night before stood near my porch, talking quietly with Mrs. Klein. At the base of the steps, the Cane Corso lay curled around her pup in a nest of borrowed blankets. Someone had draped an old flannel shirt over the puppy like a cape. Both lifted their heads when they saw me, as if taking attendant. The officer walked over, her boots crunching softly. She said they'd checked for microchips, scanned twice. No record, no owner claiming them, despite the stories on the morning radio. Technically, she added, eyes crinkling, they're strays. Practically, half the county already thinks they're your dogs. She nodded toward the porch, where the big one watched us steadily. The idea settled in my chest. Slow and surprising. I looked at the house, then at the dogs, then back at the house again. The memory of that heavy air pressed in. She still won't cross a doorway, the officer said. We tried to get her into the truck. She plants those feet like she's bracing against a fire only she can see. The pup, by contrast, wobbled toward my shoes, sniffing, tail quivering with unsure hope. The line between in and out had clearly different meanings for them. I knelt slower than I once would have and let the puppy investigate my hands. Up close, I could see the pink at the edges of his pads where ice had rubbed them raw. The mother shifted, fighting an instinct to pull him back, then let him stand with his front paws against my knee. You can stay, I told them, voice rough. We'll figure out where exactly. Together. The words felt like unlocking a door inside me. The solution came in pieces. A neighbour offered an old insulated doghouse. Stan brought over spare foam mats from the shop. Mrs. Klein contributed a faded rug that had belonged to her late husband. We set it all up against the side of my garage. Half shelter, half porch. A space that belonged neither fully inside nor fully out. The big dog stepped into it without hesitation, as if this in-between place made sense to her. Days slipped into a new pattern. Mornings, I shuffled out with coffee and meds while the Cane Corso watched the road, the pup bouncing circles around my boots. Afternoons, they followed me to the shop and dozed in a fenced corner while Stan snuck them biscuits. At night, after checking the new detectors twice, I would tap the door frame, and out in the yard, two dark shapes would lift their heads, making sure I was still there. Winter loosened its grip a little at a time. Icicles shortened. The snowbanks along Maple Ridge shrank into grey islands that finally showed the curb again. On the day the new furnace hummed to life, efficient and almost too quiet, the installer handed me a stack of forms. At the top was a rebate titled Community Safety Initiative, thanking residents who had reported hazards. I thought of two watchful shapes in the snow and felt the words miss their mark. I cut out the article from the local paper about the guardian strays who had alerted a neighbourhood to a dangerous leak. The photo showed only their outlines at my window, but I recognised the curve of the mother's head, the pup's slightly too big ears. I taped the clipping on the refrigerator beside my grandchildren's drawings. Another kind of family portrait. The magnet clicked into place with a small, satisfying finality. Some evenings, kids from the school bus would linger by my fence to call to the dogs. The Cane Corso tolerated the attention with dignified patience, allowing exactly one pat on the head before retreating to her post by the garage door. The pup, growing lanky, leaned shamelessly into every hand, then galloped back to her as if reporting the day's census of small humans. Their world had widened, but their centre stayed the same. In town, folks still talked about that stormy night, but the edge had softened. They mentioned the fire trucks, the lined-up police cars, the way the lights had painted the snow. More often, though, they spoke of the sight of a big black dog refusing to move from a man's front steps until help arrived. Fear had been replaced by something slower and sturdier. Respect. The story folded itself into the town's quiet legends. On a late winter afternoon, with light like honey on the remaining drifts, I sat on the back step while the dogs dozed nearby. The mother's head rested within reach. The younger one sprawled on her back, paws in the air, snoring softly. I laid a hand on the older dog's neck and felt the steady warmth of her. I'm glad we found each other. I'm not alone anymore. If this story touched your heart, drop a simple 1 in the comments to let us know you were here. Your support keeps these gentle stories alive. Don't forget to subscribe and stay with us, because the next story might just be the one that finds you when you least expect it.